So, according to Marx, workers were alienated from their labor in four important ways. First, from the product of their labor. Essentially, the product of a worker's labor becomes the property of the capitalist, and they're allowed to do with that labor as they see fit. Second, from their own productive activity. Workers in a capitalist society are alienated from the process of work and therefore their own productive activity. Third, from their fellow workers. The worker is alienated from other people, the alienation of man from man, as Marx calls it. Capitalism forces individuals into competition with each other, therefore alienating us from our fellow workers. And finally, from the human nature itself. Workers are alienated, at least Marx believed, because that work should not be an unhappy burden taken upon only as a need to preserve physical existence. Instead, he assumes that it is in our nature to seek out work that is vital and productive for our own lives. The essence of what it means to be human is to engage in free, conscious activity, but capitalism degrades human labor to a mere means of survival. So in a post-industrial economy, many workers end up doing service work, which often includes direct contact with clients, customers, patients, or students. Especially in the United States, there aren't many manufacturing or production jobs left. Instead, there are jobs at fast food restaurants, telemarketing services, and retail outlets. And these jobs don't actually produce anything. Rather, they serve somebody. Other workers in the post-industrial economy are involved in knowledge work, which involves working with information. When we think about this, we can think about the job of a video programmer. This is a very specialized field, and it's difficult work. But programmers probably never touch a hammer or do any type of physical labor. Instead, they look at a monitor and type things into a keyboard. And when they finish their product, the physical environment hasn't changed a bit. Nothing has moved. There's no physical product to show for all the labor. There's nothing. So just because you're working with knowledge doesn't mean you can't ultimately be alienated from that work as well. Of course, there are some resistance strategies going on out there. Not everybody's happy about how this is going. Individuals and groups cope with their working conditions in a variety of ways. Some of those ways are expressed through discontent with their working conditions by claiming or trying to reclaim control of the conditions of their labor. Most everyone who has had to work has ultimately had the fantasy about getting up and leaving at some point. But we realize that we simply can't do that. So when we are discontent at work, we find our alternate strategies to resist the alienation and frustration we feel at the workplace. Some ways that we do this, some resistance can include using work time to surf the web. We could ultimately sabotage an assembly line or personalize a workplace with photos that remind you of someplace else. Or you can have a collective resistance, much like we see in the form of unions. A union is an association of workers who bargain collectively for increased wages and benefits and better working conditions. it is very sad over the years that unions have been painted as a negative organization for the worker. There's nothing further from the fact. As a matter of fact, the only thing that allows individuals the power to collectively negotiate with large businesses is the interface of the union and its collective bargaining agreement that it reached with the workers. One of the things that has taken shape over the past 20, 30 years is the development of globalization. And then we have to think about how economies of scale and work actually operate in this new world. Globalization, of course, refers to the cultural and economic changes resulting from dramatically increased international trade and exchange in the trade and exchange in the late 20th and 21st and early 21st centuries. Of course, globalization has been fostered through the development of international economic institutions like the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, NATO, GATT, the General Agreement for Trades and Tariffs, and the International Monetary Fund, and other international global institutions. Of course, innovations in technology have pushed us firmly into the global era. The movement of money and information, and all of that is influencing the infrastructure that supports this expansion. Supporters of economic globalization believe that free trade can lead to a more efficient allocation of resources on the planet, right? Lower prices, more employment, and higher output. And everybody gets to benefit. The critics, of course, believe that free trade promotes a self-interested corporate agenda and that powerful and autonomous multinational corporations can exploit workers and increasingly shape the politics of nation states. That's the reality that we've been seeing work out mostly, folks, is large corporate interests gaining lots of control over the institutions that create our social landscape, and then taking advantage of us individual workers in an effort to maximize their gain while minimizing our gain. This is a picture of, or a chart of the top ranking economies in the world. As you can see, the United States, China, Germany, the United Kingdom, they're the big dogs, and everybody else is just trying to keep up. Globalization is driven by transnational corporations. Transnational corporations are another part of the global economy that transcend national borders, so their products can be manufactured, distributed, marketed, and sold from bases all over the world. When Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s deregulated the economy of the United States and the economy of the United Kingdom, what they allowed for was the development of transnational corporations, or the spread. It's not that we didn't have transnational corporations at the time, they just didn't have as much power with the ability to move around the social landscape as much. And so now all of a sudden we have these power-hungry corporations running around, and they're going to do some damage. Of course, companies search for the cheapest way to produce goods, and that almost always involves outsourcing or the use of sweatshop labor. Outsourcing is contracting out or transferring to another country the labor that a company might otherwise have employed its own staff to perform and had to pay them a decent wage to perform it. And then, of course, sweatshop labor or sweatshops are workplaces where workers are subject to below standard wages, long hours, and poor working conditions. So when companies that work in the or that have their headquarters in the United States no longer want to pay a livable wage to someone who is assembling their products, they outsource that. And some of the outsourcing might be done in sweatshops. This, of course, is a harbinger of the reign of the corporation. Over this time, a corporation actually becomes a juristic person, an entity that has all the legal rights, duties, and responsibilities of a person, although their primary goal is generally the pursuit of profit. So all of the benefits of being a person and very few of the side effects of being a person. So they can do whatever they want out there, but when you go and try and hold them financially or legally accountable, you're going to be dealing with a corporation, not a human being. This, of course, raises concerns about corporate ethics, environmental responsibility, fair wages, offshoring labor, offshoring money, and the list goes on. You will watch the video, The Corporation, and it's argued in that video that the corporation can be seen as a psychopath. And they use the DSM-4, it's probably DSM-5 now, but it's the disorder manual that would be used by a psychiatrist if you were an individual checking yourself in to be assessed and evaluated to tell you what's wrong with you. So look into why a corporation would be a psychopath. I promise you, you will see it again. Of course, there's a pushback to fight for workers' rights. Workers sometimes form unions, as we've talked about earlier, and those collective organizations unite for the purpose of collective bargaining, in essence, to push back against the corporation that is trying to take advantage of it. There's also some different ways of working. The economy is changing. The modern economy is characterized by a more diverse and specialized job place, and of course, more temps and freelancers. That means that we don't get benefits, generally speaking. In a capitalist society, we increasingly rely on a contingent workforce comprised of people working temporary and freelance positions, and that's going to continue into the future. And then there's the independent sector, which is composed of nonprofit organizations and their workers and volunteers. So, yep, that's the economy. We'll talk to you soon.